On the night of March 7, 1803, desperate screams echoed from the church of San Felipe de Jesús in Colima. Father Sebastián Méndez, a respected priest known for his devotion, suddenly attacked his own parishioners with superhuman strength while speaking in an ancient tongue no living soul could understand. Witnesses swore that his eyes had transformed into bottomless pits of absolute darkness. For more than 2 centuries, the church authorities kept hidden the documents describing what truly happened that night. Today, the truth about the priest who was possessed in Colima will finally be revealed. Colima, a small colonial village nestled between the slopes of the imposing volcano of fire and the Sierra Madre Occidental, had fewer than 100 inhabitants at the beginning of the 19th century. Its cobblestone streets and white adobe houses reflected the sunlight with brilliance, while in the evenings, the reddish glow of the volcano bathed the town in a haunting light. Faith was the heart of its people. Life revolved around liturgical celebrations, processions, and religious festivities that marked the calendar with precision. At the center of this devotion stood the Church of San Felipe de Jesús, a modest yet imposing building by local standards. Its gray stone walls contrasted with the whitewashed town, and its bell tower, visible from every corner of Colima, called the faithful with a sound that was an essential part of their daily lives. But few knew that the church had been built over the remains of an ancient Puripeka temple, where natives once worshipped Kurikweri, their god of fire, before the arrival of the Spaniards. Father Sebastián Méndez had arrived in Colima in 1797, after completing his studies in Mexico City. At 32, Sebastián was a man of deep conviction and calm gaze. Tall for the time, with light brown skin, jet black hair, and always dressed in his immaculate cassock, he carried a small silver cross that had once belonged to his mother. His grave yet melodic voice captivated parishioners during sermons, and his compassionate character quickly earned him the respect and affection of the entire community. Yet there was something else about Sebastián that few knew. Since childhood, he had possessed what his grandmother, a woman of indigenous descent, called the gift of seeing beyond. At times, Sebastián felt presences that others could not sense, and he dreamed of places he had never visited, describing them with unsettling accuracy. This gift, which he saw both as a blessing and a burden, drove him to seek refuge in the Catholic faith, where he found a purpose for his extraordinary sensitivity. Close to him were 3 figures. Dona Carmela Suarez, a 60-year-old widow who cared for the church with tireless devotion. Miguel Angel Rosales, a 15-year-old altar boy who admired the priest and dreamed of following in his footsteps. Dr. Ignacio Fuentes, the town's only physician, educated in Spain, who combined modern medicine with traditional knowledge. Though he sometimes disagreed with Sebastián on the nature of certain illnesses, they shared a respectful friendship. Life in Colima flowed gently, like a mountain stream, ruled by the rhythm of seasons and holy days. No one could have imagined that tranquility was about to shatter forever. It all changed in February of 1803, when little Lucia Antiveros, the 12-year-old daughter of one of Colima's wealthiest merchants, began showing disturbing behavior. Known for her sweetness and piety, the girl suddenly suffered violent convulsions, spoke in voices not her own, and displayed physical strength impossible for her frail body. I found her lying in bed, pale as the wax of the altar candles, wrote Father Sebastián later in his personal diary. Her eyes, normally sweet and full of life, stared at me with a void that chilled the soul. When I began to pray, her body tightened like a guitar string about to snap, and from her childish mouth came a deep, ancient voice speaking words in a language I did not know, yet which somehow resonated in the deepest part of my being. For 3 weeks, Father Sebastián visited the Antiveros household daily, bringing holy water, his Bible, and a crucifix from Mexico City. Neighbors whispered as they saw him pass each morning, his face increasingly gaunt, his gaze lost in thoughts he would share with no one. Dr. Fuentes, worried about both the girl's condition and the priest's health, tried to intervene. What this child suffers from is a disease of the nervous system, not demonic possession, he told Father Sebastián one evening, as they shared a cup of hot chocolate in the small sacristy. Modern medicine can explain phenomena once attributed to supernatural forces. Sebastián looked at him with a mixture of exhaustion and determination. I have seen things in that house that medicine cannot explain, Ignacio. Objects that move on their own. Words spoken in languages the girl has never studied. Knowledge about my life that only I could know. There is something in Lucia, something that does not belong to this world. The doctor, a rational man though respectful of others' beliefs, fell silent. He never forgot the look in his friend's eyes that night, as if Sebastián were staring into an abyss only he could perceive. The situation reached its breaking point on March 7th. After consulting his superiors in Guadalajara and receiving permission to perform an exorcism, Father Sebastián summoned a small group of witnesses. Among them were Dr. Fuentes, Dona Carmela, two respected members of the town council, and Lucia's parents. The ritual would take place after nightfall, in the side chapel of the church, far from curious eyes. That night was unusually cold for Colima. A persistent wind blew from the volcano, carrying with it ashes and a sulfurous stench. Inside the chapel, candles flickered nervously, casting dancing shadows on the walls adorned with saints and martyrs. Lucia, dressed in white and tied with silk ribbons to a wooden chair, stared at those around her with eyes that alternated between childish fear and something far older, far more calculating. Father Sebastián began the ritual with a steady voice, reading from the Roman ritual and sprinkling holy water upon the girl. She reacted with violent spasms. The air inside the chapel grew heavy, almost unbreathable. Later, witnesses would claim the candles turned bluish, and at times, the painted saints seemed to avert their eyes, as if unable to endure what was about to happen. As the ritual reached its peak, something happened that no one had foreseen. The girl began to speak in an ancient tongue that experts would later identify as a barely documented variant of Purépecha. Her words, though incomprehensible to the witnesses, seemed to strike deeply at Father Sebastián. He froze in the middle of a prayer, his eyes locked on Lucia. Suddenly, she spoke in perfect Spanish, but with a voice that was not her own. Cuircahueri claims you, Sebastián. Your blood carries our legacy. The temple was profaned, and the debt must be paid. You will be the vessel of our vengeance. At that moment, according to the written testimony of Dr. Fuentes, something utterly inexplicable occurred. A kind of dark mist seemed to flow out of Lucia's body and rush toward Father Sebastián, wrapping him completely. The priest collapsed to his knees, dropping the crucifix he held, and let out a scream so agonizing that it froze the blood of all present. When he stood again, only seconds later, he was no longer the same man. His eyes, once a warm shade of brown, now reflected an absolute void, like pits of obsidian. His normally calm face twisted into a grimace that was both pained and euphoric. And when he spoke, his voice carried echoes of other voices, as if multiple beings spoke through his throat at once. The temple has been reclaimed, he declared, staring at the terrified witnesses. Cuircahueri lives again. What followed was later remembered only in fragments, for chaos and terror blurred many memories. The priest, or rather, whatever now inhabited his body, attacked first Lucia's father, who had leapt forward to protect his daughter. With inhuman strength, Sebastián hurled the man against the wall. His skull struck stone with a sickening sound. As panic swept through the chapel, the priest seized one of the heavy silver candelabra and began smashing sacred images, destroying them one by one while chanting in that ancient, forgotten language. Dr. Fuentes and another man tried to restrain him, but both were violently repelled. In a desperate act of courage, Dona Carmela flung holy water into the priest's face. For a brief moment, he recoiled in pain, long enough for the others to flee the chapel. Outside, the screams had already drawn the townspeople. Soon a crowd gathered in front of the church, listening in horror to the sounds of destruction echoing within. But no one dared enter, paralyzed by a fear that went beyond anything human. Inside, the nightmare continued. The being inhabiting Father Sebastián released Lucia, who bolted from the chapel to collapse into her mother's arms. Then he began pacing through the church, pressing his hands to certain spots on the walls and floor, as if tracing an invisible map, while muttering incessantly in that ancient tongue. It was then that Miguel Ángel, the young altar boy, slipped inside through a side door, unaware of what was unfolding. He had forgotten his prayer book and had returned to fetch it. Face to face, he froze. Years later, he would tell a local chronicler. It wasn't him. It had his face, his body, but the eyes were nothingness itself. He called me by name, but not with his voice. He told me this was only the beginning, that the ancestral fire would rise again to claim what was his, and that I would bear witness to the rebirth of Kurikaweri. The altar boy, frozen with terror, watched as Father Sebastián strode toward the main altar. With his bare hands, he began tearing apart the carved wooden panels, ripping them away piece by piece. Beneath the wood lay strange symbols etched into the original stone, symbols that had been hidden for centuries. When he touched them, a reddish light seemed to seep from the carvings, illuminating his transformed face with an infernal glow. The night of March 7, 1803, burned itself into the collective memory of Colima, the night when hell itself seemed to open within the very heart of their faith. At dawn on March 8th, the town awoke to a transformed Colima. Fear hung in the air like the volcanic ash drifting down from the mountain. The church of San Felipe de Jesus, once a place of peace and solace, now stood locked, its doors secured with heavy chains. According to rumors, whispered like wildfire among the people, Father Sebastián had at last been subdued by a group of brave men led by the mayor, Don Rodrigo Guzman. He was said to lie unconscious, bound to a column in the sacristy, while reinforcements from Guadalajara were awaited. The square outside the church became an improvised camp, where neighbors gathered to share news, theories, and above all, a terror none dared name aloud. Some spoke of demonic possession. Others recalled old Puripeca legends of vengeful spirits. The skeptics, like Dr. Fuentes, searched for medical explanations, though even to their own ears, their words rang hollow. Dona Carmela, with her age and intimate knowledge of the church, became the center of many conversations. I always knew there was something strange in the foundations of that temple, she said to those willing to listen. During its construction, more than a century ago, they found stones carved with pagan symbols. My grandmother told me that the indigenous workers refused to touch them, and that several died in inexplicable accidents. The bishop then ordered the site to be built over, consecrated, and never spoken of again. Little Lucia Antiveros, miraculously freed from the presence that had tormented her, remembered nothing of what had happened during her so-called illness. Her parents clung to that explanation. But from that night on, the girl refused to sleep alone, and she screamed in terror whenever she heard the church bells toll. Meanwhile, in the sacristy, Dr. Fuentes tended to Father Sebastián. The priest drifted between unconsciousness and brief moments of lucidity, times when he begged to be released. He is fighting something, the doctor explained to Don Rodrigo. For moments he is himself, pleading for our help. But in the next instant, he becomes something else, something ancient and filled with hatred. 3 days after the incident, a contingent arrived in Colima from Guadalajara. At its head was Auxiliary Bishop Manuel Leoncio Gomez, accompanied by 2 Dominican priests specialized in cases of demonic possession. With them came an elderly indigenous man named Taisak, who claimed to be one of the last living keepers of ancient Puripeca rites. After examining Father Sebastián and listening to the testimonies of the witnesses, Bishop Gomez ordered a thorough investigation of the church. Under his supervision, workers temporarily lifted several slabs from the floor near the main altar. Beneath them lay unmistakable remnants of an older temple. Taisak identified the symbols carved into the stones as dedications to Kurikaweri, the Puripeca god of fire, associated with the sun and with war. This is not a case of traditional demonic possession, Bishop Gomez explained to the local authorities in a private meeting, of which only Don Rodrigo's written testimony survives. What afflicts Father Sebastián appears to be an ancestral entity tied both to this place and, in some way, to his own bloodline. He speaks constantly of an ancestor, a Puripeca priest, who died during the conquest. In the weeks that followed, while Father Sebastián remained confined and under strict watch, strange and unexplained phenomena began to plague Colima. Some reported seeing reddish lights floating around the church at night. Domestic animals behaved erratically, especially dogs, which howled without rest, staring toward the volcano. Even more unsettling, several townspeople claimed to have seen Father Sebastián in different places at the same time, despite everyone knowing he was locked away. Tension reached its peak exactly 1 month after the initial incident. The Colima volcano, long dormant, suddenly stirred to life. Thick columns of black smoke rose from its crater, and tremors shook the region. For many, it was the ultimate confirmation. The forces unleashed in the church were tied to powers far beyond human comprehension. On April 12, 1803, Bishop Gómez made a drastic decision. After consulting his superiors in Mexico City and the elder Taisak, he ordered that Father Sebastián be transferred to an isolated monastery in the mountains of Michoacán, where the Dominicans had experience dealing with similar cases. The news spread quickly through the village, bringing both relief and new fears. What if he awakens during the journey? Who will be able to restrain him? The townspeople whispered, recalling the priest's terrifying strength that night. To ensure a safe transfer, an elaborate plan was devised. Father Sebastián would be sedated with a herbal mixture prepared by Dr. Fuentes and Taisak. He would be transported in a closed carriage, guarded by 6 armed men, while the 2 Dominican priests prayed continuously throughout the journey. But on the morning of the transfer, a dense fog descended over Colima, unusual for the region. It was so thick that one could barely see an arm's length ahead. Despite the difficulties, the plan proceeded. The unconscious priest was placed in the carriage, which rolled out of Colima, escorted by riders carrying torches to light the path. What happened next is known only through the testimony of one of the Dominicans, the sole survivor of that cursed journey. According to his account, when the carriage was about 5 kilometers from Colima, climbing a winding road into the mountains, Father Sebastián suddenly awoke. His eyes were completely black. A smile, not human in the least, spread across his face. "Kurikawari cannot be contained," he said in that dreadful, many-voiced tone. "The ancestral fire will reclaim what is his." At that very instant, a violent tremor shook the ground. The road beneath the carriage cracked open. The terrified horses reared, dragging the vehicle toward the edge of a cliff. In the chaos, Father Sebastián broke free of his restraints with impossible strength. He leapt from the carriage just moments before it plunged into the abyss, taking most of its occupants with it. The surviving Dominican claimed the last thing he saw, before losing consciousness from a head wound, was the figure of Father Sebastián vanishing into the fog, muttering in that ancient language, his silhouette shifting and changing shape. When a rescue party from Colima reached the site of the disaster, they found the shattered remains of the carriage and the broken bodies of those within. But of Father Sebastián there was no trace. He had disappeared, as if swallowed by the earth or by the mist, thus beginning one of the region's most enduring legends. For nearly 50 years, the incident of Father Sebastián Méndez became a forbidden subject in Colima. The Church of San Felipe de Jesús was reconsecrated after an exhaustive spiritual cleansing, and the ecclesiastical authorities ordered the area beneath the altar, where the remains of the ancient Puripeca temple had been found, sealed with stone and cement. Life went on, as it always does, even after the most terrible tragedies. New generations grew up hearing only diluted, distorted versions of what had happened. But in 1852, a seemingly minor discovery rekindled the town's dormant terror. Hernán Suárez, the great-grandson of Dona Carmela and now caretaker of the church, found a small hidden compartment during a routine renovation at the base of the main confessional. Inside lay a worn leather diary. Upon examining it, Hernán realized it had belonged to Father Sebastián Méndez. Written in neat handwriting that gradually grew erratic and nearly illegible in its final pages, the diary contained not only the priest's reflections during his years in Colima but also disturbing details about his lineage and the dreams that had haunted him since his arrival in the village. "I dreamed again of the temple beneath the church," Sebastián wrote in an entry dated 2 months before the incident. "In my dream, I descend stone steps that do not exist in reality, into a circular chamber where an eternal fire burns without consuming anything. Around the fire, figures wearing obsidian masks chant in a language I should not understand, yet in the dream, it flows from my lips as though it were my native tongue. Most disturbing of all, I recognize one of the figures as my grandmother, though clad in ceremonial garments I never saw her wear in life. Another entry, even more unsettling, read, "Today, while celebrating Mass, I had a vision so vivid I nearly dropped the chalice. For an instant, I saw the congregation not as they are now but as translucent specters. Beneath their feet, even older specters in purepeca dress performed a ritual around a fire. Among them was a priest with a red feather headdress, staring directly at me, and his eyes were my eyes. I now know without doubt that this man was my ancestor, and that something of him lives within me." Deeply disturbed, Hernan took the diary to the current parish priest, Father Joaquin Altamirano, a man of science who had studied in Europe and usually dismissed local superstitions with condescending skepticism. To his surprise, Father Joaquin turned pale upon seeing the diary. "There are things better left buried, Hernan," he said gravely, a tone that contradicted his usual rationalism. "Bring the diary to my study tonight after evening Massachusetts. And for the love of God, do not read further." But Hernan's curiosity proved stronger than obedience. That afternoon, before handing over the diary, he copied several passages that struck him as particularly revealing, hiding them in his home. One in particular drew his attention, the last entry, written on the very morning of March 7, 1803. "I have made my decision. Tonight I will perform the exorcism of little Lucia, but not with the tools of the church. I will use the ancestral knowledge that has awakened within me. I now know that what afflicts the girl is connected to the profane temple, to Kurikaweri, and to my own blood. My grandmother once spoke of an ancient purepeca prophecy. When the blood of the last priest returns to the temple, the god of fire will awaken from his slumber to reclaim what was stolen. I fear that I am that last priest, even though I wear the garments of another faith. May God, whatever his true name, forgive me for what I must do." That night, as Hernan made his way to Father Joaquin's study with the diary, he heard a noise from the side chapel, the same chapel where the exorcism had taken place 50 years earlier. Approaching, he saw a figure kneeling before the altar. Believing it to be a parishioner who had lingered after Mass, he stepped forward to tell them the church was closing. When he touched the figure's shoulder, his blood turned to ice. The face that turned toward him was not human. It was a mask of twisted flesh, frozen in an impossible grimace. The eyes, black as polished obsidian, seemed to contain the void itself. "You have found my words," the figure said, its voice rising from the depths of the earth. "Now you must become my messenger." Hernan tried to flee, but his legs refused to move. He felt the presence invade his mind, twisting his memories, implanting images and knowledge that were not his own. Minutes later, Father Joaquin found him convulsing on the ground, reciting in an ancient tongue no living soul in Colima could understand. This incident unleashed a new wave of terror across the town. Hernan was confined to his home, guarded day and night, while Father Joaquin, finally abandoning his skepticism, sent an urgent plea for help to his superiors. For 3 days, Hernan alternated between periods of apparent normality and violent episodes during which he spoke with the same many-voiced tone that the old accounts had attributed to Father Sebastián. As the mystery surrounding Hernan Suarez deepened, one question haunted the town: what truly lingered within the walls of the church? On the 4th day, something unexpected happened. Hernan awoke completely lucid, but changed. His gaze carried a new depth, as though he had glimpsed truths beyond human understanding. He asked for paper and ink, and for hours he wrote furiously, page after page filled with symbols, diagrams, and passages in both Spanish and the purepeca tongue, a language he had never studied. "I am not Hernan," he explained to his wife when she asked what he was doing. "I am not Sebastián. I am the memory of something older, something deeper. I am the messenger who must prepare the way for the return." Unlike Father Sebastián 50 years earlier, whose possession had been marked by violence and chaos, Hernan displayed a chilling serenity. His actions were deliberate, methodical, and in many ways more terrifying than uncontrolled rage. He worked with precision, drawing detailed maps of tunnels and chambers beneath the church that no one knew existed. Alarmed, Father Joaquin examined Hernan's writings. What he found left him breathless. These were not the ravings of a madman but a meticulously structured document. It detailed the history of the Puripeca temple, the rituals dedicated to Kurikweri, and most unsettling of all, a prophecy. A time would come when the fire of the mountain and the fire of the temple would unite again. The diagrams showed, with architectural accuracy, subterranean chambers and passages stretching not only beneath the church but beneath much of central Colima, forming, when viewed from above, the shape of a stylized flame. At the exact center of this pattern lay the main altar of San Felipe de Jesus. "It is a map to awaken Kurikweri," Hernan declared, speaking with a voice that was not entirely his own. "The conquistadors did not destroy the temple. They only buried it. And when they built their church upon it, unknowingly they created a perfect conduit between two worlds. Father Sebastián was the first to understand this, through the Puripeca blood in his veins. I am the second. And there will be a third, who will complete the cycle when the volcano fully awakens." In the weeks that followed, other townspeople began reporting strange dreams, visions of underground fire and ancient voices calling from the depths. Some awoke speaking languages they had never learned, reciting fragments of forgotten rituals. Fear spread like a contagious plague. Overwhelmed, Father Joaquin requested assistance from experts in Mexico City. Among those who answered was Dr. Manuel Orozco y Berra, a renowned historian and archaeologist who had devoted years to studying pre-Hispanic civilizations. After examining Hernan's writings and Father Sebastián's diary, Orozco reached a disturbing conclusion. What we face here is not mere superstition, nor a case of collective hysteria. These documents contain knowledge of Puripeca rituals lost even to the most advanced studies. This is information no uneducated man could have invented. Driven by both scientific curiosity and a need to understand the threat, Orozco organized an expedition to verify the tunnels and chambers described in Hernan's maps. With reluctant permission from church authorities, a small group set out, Orozco himself, Father Joaquin, 2 archaeology students, and a mining engineer. They began excavating at the precise spot indicated as the entrance, behind the confessional where the diary had first been found. What they discovered would confirm everyone's worst fears. On June 17, 1852, after 2 days of careful excavation, the team led by Orozco y Berra uncovered what appeared to be a massive stone door. Its surface was covered in intricate carvings, flames, human figures and postures of worship, and geometric patterns that radiated from the center. The door had been sealed with a black, resinous substance that, upon later analysis, was found to contain human blood mixed with organic compounds and minerals. "It is exactly as Hernan described," Orozco murmured, running his fingers over the etched symbols. "But there is something else here, something not shown in his diagrams." At the very center of the door, barely visible beneath centuries of corrosion, was a small piece of metal embedded in the stone, a silver cross, clearly of Spanish manufacture, placed there long after the temple was built. Father Joaquin's breath caught. "The cross of Father Sebastián," he whispered, recalling the descriptions in the old testimonies. "The one that belonged to his mother. He must have placed it here as a seal, a final protection." The group fiercely debated whether to open the door. Father Joaquin insisted that the area should be resealed and never disturbed again. But Orozco y Berra, driven by both scientific passion and the urgent need to understand what plagued Colima, argued otherwise. "Knowledge is the only defense against the terror already loose among us." In the end, they compromised. The door would be opened only slightly, just enough to insert a lamp and a mirror, allowing them to glimpse inside without physically entering. The mining engineer devised a mechanism to carry out the operation from a safe distance, minimizing direct contact with the door. On June 19th, after the necessary preparations, they set their plan into motion. The stone door opened with a sound like suction, as if a perfect vacuum had existed behind it for centuries. A rush of cold, acrid air poured out, suffused with the scent of minerals and something far more primal, almost animal. The draft extinguished their lamps before they could relight them. When they finally managed to illuminate the interior and position the mirror, what they saw defied their understanding. Beyond the doorway stretched a vast circular chamber, carved directly into the living rock. The walls soared upward into darkness, seemingly endless. At the center lay a perfectly round pit, descending deep into the bowels of the earth. Around this pit, arranged in a precise geometric pattern, sat 7 human skeletons, each positioned upright, facing inward. The remains still bore traces of ceremonial attire, feathered headdresses turned to dust with time, obsidian chest plates, and copper bracelets green with oxidation. "They are the guardian priests," Orozco whispered reverently. According to the few surviving codices, the Puripeka believed that certain priests must remain eternally vigilant in their most sacred temples, even after death. But what truly unsettled the group was not the skeletons. It was what emerged from the center of the pit. A column of black obsidian, carved with symbols even more complex than those on the door. Its surface did not reflect light normally. Instead, it seemed to absorb it, giving the illusion that the column pulsed faintly, breathing. As the group watched in horrified fascination, something happened that none of them were prepared for. One of the archaeology students, who had been taking detailed notes, suddenly dropped his notebook and staggered toward the opening, drawn as if by an invisible force. Before they could stop him, he thrust his arm into the space. His scream was short but unbearable. When they pulled him back, his arm up to the elbow was blackened, as if charred, yet without burns in the usual sense. The skin bore marks that exactly replicated the symbols carved on the obsidian column. "It spoke to me," the student stammered in shock. "It showed me the original fire, the one that has burned since before time itself." The student was carried out in a state of shock, his arms still covered with the strange markings. Despite every effort, ointments, prayers, even bloodletting, the symbols would not fade. Within days, his health deteriorated dramatically. He suffered violent fevers, spoke in tongues no one recognized, and drew endless spirals of fire on the walls of his room. Finally, one night, he vanished without a trace. His family swore they heard him leave, speaking in a chorus of voices, but when they searched, there were no footprints leading away from the house. Shaken, the group decided to reseal the stone door. With great effort, they replaced the silver cross, pouring new layers of lime and cement to ensure no one could open it again. Orozco Guaybera returned to Mexico City, where he published nothing about his findings, only a cryptic note in his personal archives. "In Colima lies a gate between worlds. Its guardian has not left, it merely changes its mask." But the town would not know peace. In the years that followed, multiple witnesses claimed to see Father Sebastián Méndez wandering through the streets of Colima at night. He appeared unchanged, as though not a day had passed since 1803. Sometimes he was seen kneeling in front of the church, other times, walking toward the volcano before vanishing into the mist. The most chilling testimonies came from children, who described encountering him in their dreams. "He told me the fire will come back," whispered one child, trembling. "He said he needs me to carry it." By the late 19th century, Colima had become a place of uneasy silence. Outsiders spoke of the beauty of its volcano, its fertile lands, and its vibrant traditions, but the locals lowered their voices whenever the subject of San Felipe de Jesús arose. The church itself, though still active, gained a reputation as a cursed site. Its walls, villagers said, whispered at night. The candles burned too low. The floor sometimes trembled as if breathing. And always, the shadow of Father Sebastián lingered, wandering through memories and stone alike. In the 20th century, the legend of Father Sebastián Méndez resurfaced with renewed force. In 1926, during the Cristero War, the church of San Felipe de Jesús was temporarily abandoned. When it was finally reopened, parishioners reported that the altar seemed slightly shifted, as if the ground beneath had moved. Some claimed to hear muffled chants rising from below during Mass. In the 1960s, a team of engineers inspected the church to reinforce its foundations after an earthquake. Although they were ordered not to speak of what they found, One of the workers later confessed on his deathbed that beneath the altar they had discovered a network of stone corridors, sealed once more at the request of the diocese. The air down there was so heavy, so suffocating, the man recalled. And in the walls, we saw drawings of flames and warriors. But what terrified us most was a figure carved into the rock, a priest holding both a cross and a serpent of fire. His face was the face of Sebastián. As the century drew on, researchers of folklore and paranormal phenomena began collecting oral accounts from Colima. The story of the possessed priest became one of the most persistent tales of the region, passed down from grandparents to grandchildren. But unlike other legends, this one had documentation: Father Sebastián's diary, Hernán's writings, the testimonies of Orozco y Berra. In 1998, a group of students from the University of Colima attempted to access the sealed chamber beneath San Felipe de Jesús. They broadcasted their expedition live on local radio. The transmission was abruptly cut off after one of them screamed, claiming to see a man dressed in a cassock staring at them from the darkness. The next day, authorities denied that the students had ever been inside the church. Yet fragments of the recording survived, spreading rapidly among locals who recognized the voice on the tape. Curicawari lives. To this day, the Church of San Felipe de Jesús remains standing in Colima. Tourists admire its architecture without suspecting the abyss hidden beneath its stones. But the townspeople know. They know that, every so often, someone hears footsteps in the sacristy when no one is there. That a priest with obsidian eyes is seen praying at dawn before vanishing into the mist. That the volcano's rumble is not always natural, but sometimes an answer to something calling from below. And they whisper, in fear and reverence. The priest never left. He is waiting.